As we read through this, it strikes me that there are just some vocabulary issues. That is, there are some key words here that he's really emphasizing, and that to be clear on them is absolutely essential to understanding his point. The first ones, I think, these are big concepts, but it's rather easy, and we should note that he does actually define theism and naturalism in the essay. So it's kind of redundant for me to point it out. But, theism is just the thesis that God exists, that we live in a world in which there is a supreme being. It's kind of like the most bare bones religious stance you can take. Now, there are certain things that go along with it. I think he adds that theism is the idea that not only is there is a supreme being, but he's it, he, she, they. That the supreme being is a perfect being and also a loving being. I think he goes that far. So theism is really just the thesis that there is a God, that we live in a universe that is a created universe, and in that universe is a presence of a supreme being who's also a perfect being. And one might go on to say that a perfect being is a perfectly good being, and so it's a loving being. But basically, the idea that theism is the idea that God exists. Naturalism is the idea that basically the scientific worldview is correct. He actually defines naturalism and look for it. But naturalism is the opposite view, let's say, to theism. Basically, that there is no God, that all that exists are physical things. There's no spiritual or non-physical dimension to reality or to the universe. And that more or less what exists and what is real is simply what can be studied by natural science. And that would rule out the idea of a creator, of a metaphysical being like God who transcends the physical natural order. I think most of us are either theists or naturalists, but those are the two opposing things. Obviously, he is arguing for theism in a certain way. That is, he's arguing that the best explanation for the moral problem, the moral philosophical problem that he's exploring in this is theism. But the idea is that, okay, you just have to see what those words mean. Theism as the worldview that there is a God, naturalism as the worldview that only what is studied by science, part of the natural order, is real, which would rule out a God. I think a more difficult pair here, which he leans on very hard in the essay, is moral as opposed to prudential. And this really has to do with motivations or reasons in his article or his essay. Moral is anything having to do with right and wrong. Prudential is practical. Prudential really has to do with my happiness. A moral reason to do something is to do it because it's the right thing to do. That is, it's the morally right thing to do, and to avoid doing things because they're morally wrong or morally evil. So a moral reason to help the little kid who's drowning in the fountain, is because you have a moral obligation to do so, that you have a duty, a moral duty, that it's right to do it in this sort of absolute sense. A prudential reason for doing something is because it adds to your happiness, because you know that you should do it in a practical sense. So if I help the kid who is drowning in the fountain, I'm doing it for a moral reason. If I decide to invest my money in, I don't know, a company that makes electric cars, because I think that electric cars are the future, then that's a prudential decision. It doesn't have a moral aspect to it. It at least in my motivation, it has a purely prudential. As I'm looking to my own happiness, I'm looking to my own well-being. Can be a very subtle distinction between what is moral and what is prudential, but it's absolutely essential, obviously, for what we're doing in this class, but especially for this essay.